Hi, I'm Caroline. Welcome to The Stylish Pen, where Susan Scott and I talk about the sometimes heartbreaking world of writing, publishing, and editing. Maybe not in that order. Today, we're going to talk about writing the hard stuff. So this is a hard conversation, and it was a hard one for us to prepare. It's just been hard all around, but so important.
Yeah, we figure, we do these fun little episodes, right? The idea is we just have these great conversations. So in the time it takes to drink your turmeric tea, you can get some insight into this heartbreaking world. But sometimes, like it's worth leaning into the harder conversations, which are swirling around us all the time. So we thought, yeah, let's throw in a few of those. So
absolutely. I mean, they've been in my they've been coming through my feed a lot, and it's worrying. And I'm in some writing groups or Facebook groups, really, where people talk about writing memoir and tackling the hard stuff, about how to deal with family, what to talk about, what not to talk about, what to add or not to add. And I think then that another level comes in if you're tackling things like identity or religion, culture. Those can become very heated very fast. And it seems like everyone has an opinion about it. And it seems like everyone is dying to put you into a box.
Yeah, exactly.
And nail the lid coffin closed.
That's right. Not just put you in the box, but yeah, bury you in that box. I have to say, it's the strangest moment in time, and we're just living in this incredibly polarized society, but also polarizing, where there's this reflexive leap to judgment. And maybe it was always like this, but it's just so ramped up now. So anybody who's working on anything where they're pulling material from their lives, there's a lot more, what I see is a lot more anxiety about tackling that material or putting it out there publicly, because exactly this feeling, when am I going to get jumped on, and how should I even respond? So there's a whole level of anxiety now around the truth telling that was as if the writing wasn't hard enough. Now there's this added layer of anxiety about should I tell stuff, and how should I tell it, and am I going to set people off? So it's pretty complicated.
Yeah. And I think social media has a huge part in that, because it's so easy. And because when you look at something, it's just a snippet and it doesn't tell the whole story. It's only a part of the story. And it's so easy to jump on this bandwagon. Either you're a part of canceling someone, for example. We'll have a bigger conversation on cancel culture, but either you're part of canceling someone and not wanting to listen to them, or you aren't. And it's so black and white. There's none of this gray. There's no reason. The in between gets lost.
Yeah, this is what is really worrisome, I think, is the in-betweenness is lost, and people feel like they're getting assigned, to one side or another. And so and it's so ironic, because in writing and building literature, the whole thing is about world building, right? Which has to necessarily is complex. So, nuance and complexity, we should be the standard bearers for that. Like, we should be the champions for that, rather than reducing things to this or that. It's as if we're getting accustomed to thinking in terms of headlines, and it's the lizard part of our brain that's constantly activated. It's like, no, literary pursuits are about the beauty of complexity. So let's slow down and think things through, and let's give these writers the benefit of the doubt, instead of just assigning everybody left or right. Yeah.
And it's there's so much now that you have to be so careful, because you don't know. And I think it's very different probably in North America than it is in Europe. But in North America, we're also bigger, I'll call it, melting pots of people than in Europe necessarily. And I'll lump Europe as one great big country. And yes, I know it isn't.
That's good. You'll get called out for that. Okay. That's good.
But I could, right? And rightfully so. And I've called people out for that too. So it's,
Yeah.
to be fair, but it is a little bit different there. I think the attitude and the history, I think the history here is so different. And that's why it is a different conversation wherever you go. But I think that it's that idea of, when you're writing and you're trying to be authentic in your voice and your experiences. I know when I was writing my memoir, for me, there were moments where I really did question, do my experiences even matter? Do they count? Or I guess, do they count? I guess they matter, but do they count?
Okay. Yeah.
Because it's that, because it's not maybe the most heated topic of the day that I'm writing about.
Okay.
And also just, I don't know. And then also that idea of like, how much should I say? Am I, obviously somebody, like there's a big story happening right now that we know about. I'm happy to bring it on to myself if we don't want to call people out. But the idea of, when is it my story? Like, it's my experience, but can I talk about it as well? If it's somebody else doing something, how far do I go?
Yeah. So okay, so let's pause there. That's interesting. So the first part of what you said, that's quite intriguing. Am I writing about something? Is this insufficiently controversial? Like, who will care if I'm not talking about something that's an interesting way in. That's an interesting kind of trapdoor that we've created now, right? Where if people aren't leaning it, like I've noticed this, and you see this in social media all the time. People who are perfectly reasonable people suddenly will react to an event with the phrase, I'm gutted. I've noticed, right, this one, I'm gutted. I'm like, really? I would never really associate that temperament with that phrase. But the phrase is just a thing now. It's just, and that's a really powerful, if you think about what that means, to say, I'm gutted. It's next level beyond heartbroken, I think.
Yeah.
Like, gutted is a whole different thing. But, so we've gotten used to now just everything is foot to the floor, right? Everything has to have this incredible drive and power. And I think film culture has a lot to do with this too, what we've consented with. So there you are, asking yourself, Caroline, have I even lived a sufficiently dramatic life that I have any right to talk about? And which is kind of crazy making, because I know, in fact, you're talking about all kinds of really rich, interesting things that would resonate with people. But we are at this moment in time. There's the question, but have you suffered enough? Have you, how can you frame your story in a way that has this sort of, that you're hitting these markers now that people associate with power and drama, and is it sufficient? So, wow, where did we get to this place? Where a really an interesting life is insufficient. Interesting is no longer sufficient. We raised the bar, and there has to be lots of drama and trauma in it, or is it worth telling? And I think, okay, let's take a step back from that. Is that really how we want to think about people's lives? Is that really what we want writing to be like? Really?
And I think then that works on that level too of, to me, a lot of these feelings people have and interactions they have with the world and their history, I think even though I may not have experienced the same things you have, I can still understand them to an effect, because I can translate them into my own and then go, oh, okay, so I understand that. But I feel like we're not allowed to necessarily do that either. How can I possibly understand?
Okay. Right. Right.
That's something I'm finding as well.
Yes, is human experience. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Right. So okay, we're moving into we're moving away from a kind of collective understanding of the universality of human experience into more, this is around identity politics, right? And and who could possibly relate to or empathize with. Yeah, that's a complicated one. That is a complicated one. Oh gosh, we're gonna get in trouble just for even posting this episode.
I know. Great. Excellent. I'll take it.
Yeah, I guess I'm like Team Universal. I would prefer to think that we have the faculty of imagination. The human imagination is capable, is inextricably linked to empathy, and the ability to empathize. So yes, I might not be able to have that exact same experience, but by reading somebody's material, but I want to be invited into that space because I really would like to empathize with what that person's talking about. I don't want my understanding to colonize their experience. That's true. There's a boundary that I think is very raw. But yeah, I want to be able to empathize with those things. That's how I learn. That's the nature of moving through the world.
And I think that you just said it there too. It's the lines, because the lines are shifting in different ways right now. And I admit I'm having a hard time sometimes keeping up with where that line has shifted and how it's shifted and what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say. And this is a little bit different, but it leads into it, is that that idea of free speech and what we're allowed to say. And is it, there's that ethical versus legal line as well. So obviously slander is bad.
Yeah.
That's the legal no. That's the legal, and to me that's a fairly hard line. But then there's that ethical line that's a little bit maybe softer, and it depends. And when I write something, do I take the chance that my family will hate me? I may decide that, sure, I don't let them hate me. If my family is listening, there's nothing like that in there, but
I can vouch for that.
But also I find that especially with some of these cases I'm reading about, the whole world is suddenly deciding.
Yeah.
And is it up to you to decide? Because you don't really know what really went on. You have one person's point of view. But people are taking a very hard, fast, and angry line quite often, I find. But maybe this person doesn't care. Like if I write something horrible about my family, they have just as much right to then retaliate and write some horrible things about me. And maybe that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just find it so interesting that why are we wanting to be so charged up about all these things, right? Obviously, the writer has made certain choices going public with things. Yes, of course, people have the right to respond however they want, but why are we giving ourselves over to such a incredible do or die kind of stances on these things? I just don't see it. And to me, it concerns me. I think there's a larger issue just happening in the culture in general, which is words like fight, or so we live in this safety and harm framed culture now, and that was never the case before. That was not language that was used to frame things, but now that really is. So what does that imply? It implies that we're constantly under threat, and maybe in some instances, of course, I mean, it would be unrealistic to think, oh, is the planet under threat? Yeah, we need to be thinking about that. Oh, are there actual political threats that we're not paying attention to? Probably we should be paying attention to things. But do we at every level of every experience want to label it, under threat? And I just think every time, and it's interesting if you just listen how often people talk about we need to fight for this or fight for that. I think, okay, some things are worth fighting for, but every time your brain hears yourself saying fight for XYZ, imagine what you're doing to your system. Like you're constantly on this overdrive. And are we going to do that when it comes down to people telling their stories too? Obviously, there's a whole bunch of people who are doing it and they feel it's important. I really would rather step back and think about, do we need to all jump on this bandwagon? I don't see the value of it. Let's pick our fights and pick our battles, and pour our energies where it's worth pouring it.
I agree. I mean, I've been in groups where, they make a big deal about it being safe, but I look at the conversation and I feel personally that if I am not exactly of the same opinion that everyone else is there, and I'm not thinking the exact same thing and maybe even in the exact same way, if I'm not
right.
formatting it in the exact same way,
yeah.
I don't feel safe saying anything, because I know I'll be attacked by people because maybe my stance isn't quite so much to their side, and I don't, because it's so polarized now. You're either right or left.
Yeah.
And there's sort of I just mentioned this before, but there's that gray middle isn't there.
Yeah.
And I think that and I agree, like, maybe, right. And also the other part of this is that it becomes so, everything is automatically offensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to get away from that too.
Yeah.
That idea that right away I need to be completely mortally offended by everything.
Yeah.
When maybe that's not the intent.
Yeah. Exactly. I think so too. I mean, there is value in the activist stream that will carry the banner for, alerting everyone. Okay, fine. That there's a place for that, but it's kind of devolved into purity tests, right? And this is, what do we gain from this? So I'm on Team Gray. I think we should actually reclaim the middle, and stand up for that. The mushy middle, because really that's where most people live, and people actually don't appreciate being corralled into one side or the other. It's just not really, it doesn't feel comfortable. You're going to get pushback because people want to be able to think complex things and think contradictory things, or think one thing one day and then they evolve to something else another day. So I don't think we do ourselves any service by just constantly pushing.
Exactly. And it's the same, I can tell you now, I don't think the same way necessarily as I did when I was in my teens, and I think very differently.
Your newsflash, your thinking changed. Yeah.
Right. And also and for me, moving to a different country, living in Poland for 4 years, made me think differently about certain things than it did when I lived in Toronto or Vancouver. So all of those things played an impact. And I think that's, people forget that as well. We forget about the experiences and just getting out and learning. Because, and we sit enclosed in our little worlds and make up these ideas and make them hard and fast walls that we can't break through.
And something you've said on the internet 6 years ago then comes back to haunt you years later when your thinking has changed your whole life. I mean, there's so many classic examples of that, of wanting to pin people to the wall for something that was said at one point in time. Team Gray. I'm definitely Team Gray, Team Universal, Team Complicated, probably. Which means maybe we have very few friends. You and I will get together occasionally, have conversations. Probably the only ones left.
Happy to do that.
But it's interesting. So I had a conversation at the table with my husband this morning. I was telling him we were going to talk about this, and he said, "Well, why don't people just say what they think? And then who cares if anybody?" And I said, "Okay, fine. You would say exactly what you think, and you wouldn't care what other people think. But some people really do care, and they don't. And they, in their writing, they want to be able to reach people. They want to reach readers, and they don't want to alienate people. And they do care. They care. So I think we need to work at, those of us who do care. Let's work at trying to change the culture so it's a benevolent culture. I don't want to think in terms of safety and harm all the time. I just want an empathetic, rich, imaginative, deeply human place.
Mm-hmm. And I think all of this can be said without being deeply offensive to people. I think saying I will grant him, I will give him like 0.5% of that, because I think that maybe sometimes it is important to say things.
Yeah.
Because sometimes sometimes you need to hear something that you don't agree with in
True.
order to figure out where you stand. I'll say that. I think you can say things, I think you can say things without being intentionally offensive.
Yeah.
But that again falls right into that team gray,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Because gray has many shades.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what literature is, right? It is the project trying to figure out what it means to be human. So we have to have space, we have to make space, we have to hold space, all of that. So that's what we're doing here.
Exactly. So for anyone who's team gray or white or black,
Everyone's
um,
welcome. That's right. Yeah.
or any of the other shades, we're more than happy to hear your comments. You can find us on Instagram, on the internet. Our information will be posted in just a second. And this conversation, I'm going to say, is to be continued because I think it's really interesting and there's so many more facets of it.
Okay.
So,
Well, I'll work up my nerve for part 2.
yes.
Thanks for the advance warning.
Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Thank you.